I saw this post on Rednote about how Trump rolls back equal employment opportunity executive order. He states what order that is in that video. I don't remember the subsection, what it was. But I asked ChatGPT, can he explain what it means that Trump is rolling this back? Because I don't know the exact, definitions for all these, laws and orders. It says President Donald Trump has recently issued an executive order that significantly alters federal equal employment opportunity policies. This order revokes Executive Order 11246, established in 1965 by President Lyndon B. Johnson, which prohibited employment discrimination by federal contractors based on race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or national origin, and mandated affirmative action to promote workplace diversity. The new executive order terminates diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) programs with federal agencies and among federal contractors. It mandates the closure of DEI offices, places DEI staff on paid leave pending dismissal, and instructs agencies to remove DEI-related content from official communications. The administration argues that these measures are necessary to eliminate what it perceives as discriminatory practices and to restore merit-based hiring and employment practices. Critics express concern that dismantling DEI initiatives and revoking affirmative action requirements may undermine decades of progress in promoting equal employment opportunities and addressing systemic discrimination. They argue that these actions could lead to decreased workplace diversity and hinder efforts to ensure fair treatment for historically marginalized groups. In summary, President Donald Trump's executive order represents a significant shift in federal employment policy, moving away from DEI and affirmative action initiatives toward an emphasis on merit-based practices. This change has sparked a national debate about the role of such programs in promoting workplace equality and the potential implications of the removal. And these are some sites that they got the information from: Reuters, Vox, and AP News. So, in other words, Trump is completely getting rid of the discrimination laws for any kind of federal job. So, if you want to work in any kind of federal job, they will be able to not hire you based on discriminatory beliefs. So, whether or not you're black, white, Asian, Mexican, whatever, they can choose based on your race. They could say, no, you're gay, I don't want you working here. They could say, no, you're transgender, you aren't going to fit our company well. So guess what? We're only going to hire straight people who identify as their birth gender, and it's probably going to only hire people that are white because our whole government is based off white supremacy. So pretty much they're going to end up putting millions of people out of work because companies are going to be able to discriminate now if they are listed as a federal company. Now, this might just be my belief on it, but this whole thing is a load of bullshit. Because you're taking away the one thing that protects people's rights. That's like saying you're going to remove the rights for equal equality of women. You're going to abolish the amendment that gives women the right to vote or work equally as men. There's no difference. Because now you're putting it says gender is one of the things. Sex. So if a company only wants to hire men and not women, they can do that. And they don't have to really give a reason. They could just say, no, you're a woman. So, does anyone else feel a little bit heated about this topic? I'm just now finding this out. Can anyone else chime in? Give me your thoughts and opinions, because this is kind of crazy. So, after reading, the new executive order overrule about Trump, which I just did a previous video on. This will be a part 2. I asked ChatGPT, so in other words, you're saying that Trump is allowing federal companies to discriminate for the hiring process? And the response was, President Trump's recent executive order titled Ending Illegal Discrimination and Restoring Merit-Based Opportunity revokes Executive Order 11246, which had prohibited employment discrimination by federal contractors and required affirmative action programs. While this action eliminates the mandate for federal contractors to implement affirmative action programs, it does not permit or endorse discriminatory hiring processes or practices. See, that's good then. At least there's other things that protect this. It says federal contractors are still subject to Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which I had to stress this exact Civil Rights Act to Job Corps, which is a federal program that helps people get, a trade, get an education, get your license. It's all federally funded. I had to fight this exact Civil Rights Act. So it says, the Civil Rights Act 64 prohibits employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. So that's the only thing that it protects. It does not protect sexual orientation. It does not protect gender identity. Nothing. It only protects the employment discrimination based on these topics. What I had to argue with my higher-ups in Job Corps when I went there, because at the time, I was still finding myself and I identified as transgender. I identified as a male. I had many friends that also identified as a male. I had plenty of friends that identified as female, as the opposite gender than they were born with. And they tried to enforce strict uniform policies on the students and said, if you are born a female, it does not matter what your identity is, you are required to wear female attire, aka bras, skirts, whatever. Pretty much said, because there were plenty of us that identified as male that did not like wearing bras. They're constricting. So, and there were a lot of my friends who also had started the process of transitioning genders, so their breasts are very uncomfortable when they're being constricted because they atrophied. And they tried to enforce that women by birth, no matter what your identity was, you had to wear a bra. And this Civil Rights Act of 1964, if you look it up, it'll explain a little bit more in detail. This right protects against biased and gender-specific uniforms. Especially, an employer cannot, either federally or locally company, it does not matter. No company, no employer is allowed to require women to wear any specific feminine clothing. It cannot be discriminatory based on your sex. Therefore, if a person that is a woman by birth has to wear a bra, that also means the company that is enforcing that law on the women have to also enforce it onto the men. Therefore, if a man comes in not wearing a bra, they have to be told put on a bra. Because the women have to wear a bra. That is just a general, that is what my argument was when I had to fight this. And I fought it tooth and nail and I won. Because they had no right enforcing a uniform policy. And that's what they tried to do. They said it is part of your uniform, you have to wear a bra. So if it's part of my uniform, it is also part of at the time, my boyfriend's uniform. He was a male. It would be a part of my classmates' uniforms that were males. They would have to wear a bra based on the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now, this same act is being protected that these specific topics cannot be infringed upon because of Trump's order. But they can still be discriminatory based on sexual orientation and gender identity. As said before. Let me find where it's set up here. It says that it's revoking order number 11246, established in 1965, which prohibited employment discrimination by federal contractors based on race, color, religion, sex. Those are all protected. But sexual orientation, gender identity, or national origin are not protected by Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Those rights are not protected. National origin is protected, sorry. But your gender identity and your sexual orientation will not be protected, and federal companies are allowed to refuse you hiring because you're transgender, or that you are a lesbian, or that you're gay. It does not matter. They can choose to not hire you because those things are not protected anymore because of Trump. So, yeah. It says, in summary, the executive order removes the requirement of affirmation action programs among federal contractors, but does not allow these entities to engage in discriminatory hiring practices. But at the same time, it tells you what Trump is revoking, which is the right to protect the right to protect your not only race, color, religion, sex, but sexual orientation and your gender identity. That is what the Executive Order 11246 in 1965 protected. It will no longer protect those at all. It'll only protect discriminatory action based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. It seems like we're backtracking a lot, and it's kind of ridiculous, in all honesty. Part 3. Please stay with me. This is going to be a long one because I am ranting. I asked ChatGPT, so what you're saying is Donald Trump is revoking the Executive Order 11246 that was established in 1965 that prohibited employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity, or your national origin. That is what Trump is revoking, correct? It responded with, yes, that is correct. The recent executive order issued by Donald Trump revokes Executive Order 11246, which was established in 1965 by President Lyndon B. Johnson. The order prohibited employment discrimination by federal contractors based on race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or national origin, and also required affirmative action programs to promote diversity in the workplace. While this revocation removes those specific federal contractors' obligations or anti-discrimination laws, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act 1964 still apply. However, the removal of the executive order weakens protections and may reduce accountability for fostering workplace diversity and inclusion among federal contractors. My next question was, so since Trump is revoking the executive order of 11246 that protected your sexual orientation and your gender identity, those two will no longer be protected or prohibited discrimination against. The response was, if Executive Order 11246 is revoked, it means that federal contractors would no longer be specifically required to prohibit discrimination based on your sexual orientation or your gender identity as part of their obligations under that order. This could potentially leave these groups more vulnerable to discrimination in workplaces governed by federal contracting rules. So if you identify as a different gender or you have a different sexual orientation besides straight, you are allowed to be discriminated against. They are allowing your employers to discriminate you if you identify as anything other than straight or your fucking birth gender. We are backtracking so far everything that Obama had put into place for equality, for gay rights, for gender identity rights, for gay marriage. All of that's going backwards now. However, other federal laws and regulations still provide some protections, such as the Title VII of Civil Rights Act of 1964, which the Supreme Court ruled in 2020 in Bostock versus Clayton County includes protections against discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity under its prohibition of sex discrimination. So, they contradict each other, the two acts. But it's a gray area. It's still iffy on whether or not they will be able to discriminate or not against your sexual orientation or gender identity, because one act protects it and one act doesn't. State or local news, which may also offer additional protections. State and local laws can also offer protections. So if your state has a specific law protecting you against this discrimination, you have a higher chance of not facing discrimination. But if you, say, live in a state that isn't very kind on those topics, you might be heavily discriminated against. That said, the removal of Executive Order 11246's explicit language weakens federal contractors' accountability for upholding protections related to sexual orientation and gender identity. So if they do discriminate against you, they're not really accountable. They don't have to enforce it. So this is food for thought for anyone who identifies as anything else besides your birth gender or your, straight. If you identify or your orientation is anything different, just be cautious and, stand up for your rights, because this is unjust and unfair. I believe everyone should be looked at equally, and Trump is showing his true colors right now. I think we all need to stand up and impeach him like we tried to do several years ago. He needs to be impeached. He needs to be thrown out of office. He is not the president for the United States. Thank you for listening. So this will be my last post. This is part 4 on the executive order being rolled back. So I said with ChatGPT, I asked, so with that said, the executive order of 11246 allows for discrimination against sexual orientation and gender identity. But the VII Civil Rights Act of 1964 protects gender identity and sexual orientation discrimination. Does that mean that it's a gray area, or that some places may not protect those laws and those rights for citizens because it's a federal act? Now, this was my question, and my answer was pretty much in the question. It is a gray area, and yes, some places are not required to uphold this right. So, let's read what it said. You've identified an important nuance. Here's how it works. 1. The Executive Order 11246. This explicitly requires federal contractors to implement non-discrimination policies, including protections for sexual orientation and gender identity. By revoking it, federal contractors are no longer mandated to include these specific protections as part of their policies. This weakens workplace protection for employees under federal contractors. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Supreme Court's 2020 decision in Bostock versus Clayton County ruled that discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity is a form of sex discrimination and therefore prohibited under Title VII. This protection applies to most workplaces in the U.S., regardless of whether the employer is federal contractor or not. The gray area concern. The concerns are enforcement gaps. While Title VII provides a broad baseline of protection, its enforcement depends on federal agencies like Equal Employment Opportunity Commissions, the EEOC. If these agencies deprioritize enforcement or guidance around LGBTQ plus protections, individuals might find it harder to assert their rights. So we have to really fight tooth and nail for our rights if they deprioritize the LGBTQ community. Next is state laws. Some states have stronger anti-discrimination laws that explicitly protect sexual orientation and gender identity, while others do not. In states with weaker or no protections, Title VII might be the only line of defense, which could leave room for inconsistent applications of the law. Federal contractors. Revoking Executive Order 11246 removes a layer of accountability for federal contractors, even though Title VII still applies. Contractors no longer have a specific federal obligation to include LGBTQ plus protections in their affirmative action policies. Therefore, they don't have to protect your rights if they don't care about them. In summary, while Title VII provides legal protection, revoking Executive Order 11246 creates potential inconsistencies, especially for employees of federal contractors. In practice, this might embolden discrimination in environments where oversight is weaker, and it may take legal challenges, means taking it to court, to enforce Title VII rights in some cases. Thus, the gray area exists more in enforcement and practical application rather than the legal framework itself. So in other words, to sum it up easier in, more simpler terms, Donald Trump is removing a executive order that protects federally against discrimination by the LGBTQ community. But while doing that, Title VII still protects those rights, but will not be enforced in areas that there is no protection. Meaning, if you want to enforce that right, because you have that right, if you want to enforce that right, the Title VII, you need to take it to court. You will have to sue the company for discrimination. You will have to literally figure it out, on your own, with no help. They literally want you to fight, because then it's a 50-50 chance you'll win, especially if you can't afford to fight it. Because going to court and hiring a lawyer costs a lot of money. Trump is really messing up, and he's only been in office for less than a week. He's already running our country into the ground. I really think I'm going to move to China. I really am.